in the works and talk there as well. Yeah.
So often I ask the questions that people, maybe I can't talk down there so I can see what I'm looking at. Does this work as well? Yeah, that's right. That's better. So important questions to ask. People need to be challenged, I think, these days to really look at the news and see what's happening. Because it's one thing as Christians to understand the Word of God, but also understand history as well. It's his story about what is going on in the world. And to try and make sense of the news. Some people are just shutting down and saying, I'll just get on with my life and I don't want to know what's going on. But if it's how do we understand the things that are shaping up in our time? I think that's very important, and we should be people not only just of the book, it's not just a spiritual book about our relationship with God, but it's also a historical book about God's purposes in the world. And the times that we're living in are very critical, and we'll hear all about that, I think, a little bit more, perhaps this afternoon, from our dear brother. What's so special about Israel? What's all the fuss? Why do people still hate the Jews? That's a mystery, isn't it? How the provocation of the Jews in people's lives just brings out such a reaction to these people. But where can we find out the answers? And so often, sadly, even in the Christian world, people are more inclined to listen to what the BBC says and what their newspaper might report than what they read historically in the Bible. If you look at Acts chapter 3, in fact, there's a very interesting verse there, because Peter is saying this very thing, is that as he preaches to Jewish people, he says these things in verse 18 of chapter 3. But those things which God foretold by the mouth of his prophets, that the Christ would suffer, he has thus fulfilled. And many Christians today would say, yeah, well, I believe in prophecy in relation to Jesus, but they have a problem a little later as it goes on. And that he may send Jesus, who was preached to you before, whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets from the world began, since the world began. Now, it's that bit that they forget. Curious thing is about Jewish people is that their focus is very much on the restoration of Israel, and they ignore the prophecies in relation to Messiah. So Christians are forgetting about the restoration of the land, and Jewish people are trying to ignore the prophecies, their prophets speaking about Messiah. They're both true, and they're both coming to fulfillment in our time. So Peter was saying, look, this is what's happening, but there's something greater going to happen in times to come. How else do you explain the existence of Israel? Is it an accident? Was it Jewish bankers? Was it Jewish people incensed by the Anglican Church trying to rescue Israel from the Anglicans? Well, probably there's some truth in that. If you look at the history, the wonderful history of the Anglican involvement post-evangelical awakening and political and religious linking in the Middle East to bring about the restoration of the land, but under Britain at that time and under the Anglican Church. So the Jews actually did rescue Israel from becoming an Anglican parish, which is a blessing, I think. Here's a picture. Here's a beach party. Interestingly, what are they doing? Well, they've got 120 seashells. Some were painted grey, some were painted white, and it was all about allocating land in this area. Some people were picked out from names, some were picked out for land, and they were given a plot of land in this place on a beach on the shore of Palestine in 1910. A little while later, turns into the beach party, I'm afraid, is somewhere down there, probably, but the rest of it becomes Tel Aviv. huge transformation of the land in our time, 100 years ago. So that's what's taken place in... So the two miracles in our lifetime, the rebirth of the nation of Israel back to the land, and it's good to pray for Aliyah, but the greater return is the new birth of the people of Israel back to God. And that's the next verse. And sometimes we forget the next verse, that the purpose of Aliyah is to bring them to know the Lord. It's wonderful if they get saved on the way. It's wonderful they come as believers. But it's what's happening largely is Israel is the place where the gospel is going forth to Jewish people, perhaps more than anywhere else in the world. And I think Tristan will understand and know the history. It's strange, really. 100 years ago, perhaps in the heyday of the Messianic testimony and the Anglicans' church mission to the Jews, people were coming to faith in this country, perhaps in many, in large numbers compared with the population, the Jewish population. In the 1880s, the Jewish population of England was about 60,000, I believe. Now it is 5 times that amount. In the 1880s, there were 10 times as many Jewish missions operating, bringing the gospel to Jewish people, and 10 times more Jewish people coming to faith in the diaspora. Now it's sort of somewhat reversed, but we're seeing in the land people coming to faith in the context of Israel as a modern nation state, and looking to God to see why they are there. Why has he brought his people back? So that they might be in that crucible of affliction, and in their affliction they shall earnestly seek me, says Hosea, doesn't he? So here's the Galilee, nice, well known on tours. If you're going Jerusalem, you'll see the sights, the Jezreel Valley, fruitful land. It was a marsh 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and here's Tel Aviv. Here's the covenant promises made to Israel, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to Moses in Exodus 6, reminding them that they are chosen people for a purpose. But we're chosen for a purpose too, aren't we? We're not an accident waiting to happen. We are chosen in him for a purpose. The eternal purposes of God have been established in our lives. And God preordained that and set that in motion before the foundation of the world, when Jesus died for us as well. Jeremiah 23, I will gather the people. So many of the prophets talking about the restoration back to the land. And then, of course, he will make a new covenant. And the new covenant, which we celebrate really in most churches in this country, Holy Communion, the Lord's table, whatever it's called, is a celebration of the new covenant made in the blood of Jesus. Because of his blood shed, there's a new covenant established with people. I will gather and I will cleanse. That was his purpose, to pour new water on, sprinkle them so that their heart may be different. And the key phrase in all these passages is in the latter days. Some, I know, have got a bit of a interpretation about Zechariah 12, but it does say in Zechariah 12, consistently and continuously, in the latter days, these things will take place. That Jerusalem will be the focal point of world attention. And they will try and heave it away. And in their heaving away, they will be turned mad. I think they will drink from a cup of reeling. And here's this passage in Acts chapter 3, which Peter spoke from. So prophecies made and prophecies fulfilled. It wasn't empty promises. It was God's eternal word. Israel's size, it's an amazing thing, isn't it, that Israel causes such trouble in the world. This small nation is such an irritation to the world. But Palestine, under 2,000 years of Arab control, a land of desolation. And I think if you visited in the 1800s, here are these people worshipping the Western Wall. Today, it's the modern city of Jerusalem. Here's a look outside the Jaffa Gate. I think you can just about see it here. And this, look for this spire here. That's the same place. It's the road to Hebron. Let's go back. There it is there. It's donkeys, horses and camels going down the road there, across the Hinnom Valley at the bottom there. And now it's a car park. A bit like the M25. Here's a look from, it's at the Begin Centre, probably down just below the St Andrew's Church. If anybody's stayed there, the Begin Centre is probably around about there, somewhere around there. And here's its donkeys and camels on the way to Hebron. And it's transformed. That's the actual roof of the Begin Centre. Here's the Herva Synagogue, built in 1836, but the original one built in 1700. This group of 500 Ashkenazi Jews coming from Russia, making Aliyah. Yeah, okay, that'll save my battery. Okay, now I need three hands. I'll just have that down there if I need it. Thanks, Eddie. This Herva Synagogue, built by Rabbi the Judah the Hasid, from the Ashkenazi rabbi from Russia, originally built, and he died within a few months of arriving. They built the first Herva Synagogue, and in 1720, because they couldn't pay the bills, it was destroyed. Okay, 100 years later, another group come from Lithuania, and the Vilna Gaon and his group come, and they rebuild it in more pleasant times, a time when Egypt had driven the Ottomans out under Mehmet Ali, and they had a more better time in Jerusalem, so they rebuilt the synagogue. It opened in 1864, but it's this synagogue that was destroyed by the Jordanians in 1948. In the War of Independence, they destroyed all the synagogues in the old city. And the Herva Synagogue, which, as I say, was... finally, if you've been to Israel over the last, up to about 2000, you'd have seen this rainbow of stones, which was the archway there, just rebuilt to remind people of the Herva Synagogue. Herva means destruction, but these people didn't give up. And in 2005, they decided to rebuild this Herva Synagogue and dedicated in 2010. Caused a riot, like most things happen. When anything happens in Jerusalem, it causes a riot. When they opened the Hasmonean Tunnel, both ends, it caused a riot. When the entrance up to the Temple Mount was collapsing and wanted to rebuild it, it caused a riot. And when they opened the Herva Synagogue in 2010, it caused a riot. Why? Because they expected them to start doing animal sacrifice here, and they thought this was the third temple. Slightly wrong. Not the third temple, it's the Herva Synagogue. It actually fulfilled the prophecy made by Judah the Hasid back in those days, that this synagogue would be built and destroyed twice, but the third time it's rebuilt, Messiah will come. That's not encouragement to listen to what rabbis say about everything else, but I think he was probably right about that.